morning, everyone. Today's Thursday, February 13th, and welcome to the New Possibilities Hour, part of the Will Work for Food project founded by Natalie Armstrong Motan. Every Thursday morning, Jean Lawler and I are delighted to host another cutting-edge webinar for mediators, arbitrators, lawyers, and everyone who negotiates. As you likely know, there's no charge for these great programs. Rather, we ask you to contribute to a food bank if you like what you see. And our audiences have been so generous in contributing in honor of our great speakers over the nearly 5 years we have been doing these webinars. One of my favorite parts of the program each week is when we announce the running total of just how much our generous audiences have contributed. Jean Lawler, would you please do the honors?
With pleasure, Jeff. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever in the world you might be. It's my pleasure today to say that thanks to your generosity and the generosity of our many speakers over all of these years and months now, have resulted in donations according to our running total showing what people have told us they've donated. $686,842.15. That has provided millions and millions of meals for people around the globe. And so thank you so much. It's just great. Thanks so much.
Excellent. And today we have another terrific presentation for you. Mediator Melissa Kinzler will be discussing gold standard case preparation, strategic mediation for superior settlements. Melissa is an up-and-coming superstar in the world of mediation. She has a background in business management, psychology, and communication. She has a master's in dispute resolution. She's been trained at Harvard Law School, among other places, and brings a wealth of knowledge, experience, and skill to the task. Melissa Kinzler, please tell us a little bit about the food bank to which you would like people to contribute if they're able to do so. And then on with the presentation. The floor is yours.
So I encourage everyone to donate today to either a food bank of your choice or the Second Harvest Food Bank in Santa Cruz County, California. Similar to the fires that recently happened in Los Angeles, a fire wiped out a lot of my hometown up there. And the food bank was instrumental in helping survivors of that fire immediately following it. So if you'd like to donate to them, please do, or just your local food bank would be helpful. Hello, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to see so many lovely faces in the room. My name is Melissa Kinzler. I'm a commercial mediator out of Southern California. I'm here to talk today on the topic of the gold standard of case prep, strategic mediation case prep that delivers superior settlements. And that's a really long-winded way of saying I believe your clients deserve more than a numbers shuttler when it comes to mediation. And I'm here to share with you an expanded way of case prepping that is very popular with a number of attorneys I know from Harvard Law School, and they're using it with great advantage. It's informing their negotiations and allowing them to really shape strategy and shape outcomes to a mutually beneficial result, but more importantly, in a way that allows their client to leave the table better than they arrived. And so I'm just going to share that with you today. Here we only have less than an hour, so I'm going to be sharing the first half of how I do this, which I think will yield some really interesting results for you. So let's begin. How many of you have been in a mediation that broke down due to unspoken issues that were just not addressed in negotiation? I think all of us can say in our careers that we've been in at least one. So traditional adversarial negotiation in commercial disputes focuses on maximizing individual gain, often at the expense of the other party. And while this is widely used in legal settings, this approach has significant drawbacks, particularly in mediation. The zero-sum mentality fosters a win-lose dynamic, and it undermines collaboration, which is necessary for mediation. And while adversarial tactics tend to oversimplify complex business disputes, they wind up limiting long-term effectiveness, in my experience and the experience of my colleagues. Additionally, the rigid positional bargaining stifles creative problem solving, and it increases the risk of public exposure, which many of my clients do not want. It drains resources as well, and it adds stress to all the stakeholders involved, and it just makes the case that much more difficult to settle. To address these challenges, principled negotiation models like this 3 conversations model I'm going to introduce today offer a much more effective alternative as either a complementary tool or, in some cases, a replacement of traditional negotiation. And this principled negotiation model is also sometimes referred to as integrative negotiation model. And while some of you may have been exposed to it, very few people have been exposed to it in a way that allows them to utilize it in their case prep to their advantage. And that's really what I'm here to show you today. So by shifting the focus from rigid positions to underlying interests and relationships, this method fosters understanding and preserves business partnerships. Now, that may not be a super value to you in every case, but in my experience, the higher up you go on the food chain, the more someone is an expert in their field, the best in their industry, really an innovative, forward-thinking, successful person, the more the narrower their field of interaction becomes. And so what I have found is that people who are at the very apex of their careers typically will see the same group of players over and over again throughout the years. And one year they might be enemies, and the next year they might have to partner together to do a hostile takeover of another partnership or business. And then the year after that, they might serve on a board together. And the year after that, one might sell a company to the other. And so they tend to meet up again and again as that upper echelon circle is quite small. And so this is a very beneficial framework to use if you're settling cases with people at that level. So the 3 conversations model is the foundational piece that we're going to use today to build our case prep. And the concept here is that every conversation that you have with another person, you're really having 3 conversations in one, because there are 3 major factors that are going to underlie their responses, and they're going to shape how they respond. It's also going to shape how they approach you and how they see the situation. So if we're going to acknowledge this rather than deny it, then let's acknowledge it and let's have these conversations in a more useful and productive way that benefit us in negotiation. So the first of the 3 is the what happened conversation. The next one is the feelings conversation. And the third one is the identity conversation. So those are the 3 conversations. Whenever you're discussing your position or their position and you're negotiating in a mediation, you're really having 3 simultaneous conversations running in the background. So let's have them in a more useful and productive way. So let's break it down, beginning with the what happened conversation. This is sometimes referred to as the story, the story that people have, their version of the story. And the focus here is on differing perspectives, differing intentions, and attributions of blame. The story is based on perspectives, and perspectives are like music. We can hear the same piece and have vastly different experiences. I might think it's uplifting or invigorating or melancholy, and you might feel it is simply noise and it's irritating and you want me to turn it off. So many things go into shaping our perspectives. The culture we were raised in, the life that we have lived, our lived experiences, so to speak. It might be our personal taste in things. It could be faith. So many things shape one's views, and everybody's perspective of even the same experience is going to be very, very different. And we just have to acknowledge that. You must be able to suspend judgment for just a few moments to be able to truly identify the different perspectives, not from an angle of right or wrong, but just as equal but different. And in order to, the old adage, like keep your friends close and your enemies closer, in order to be a really effective negotiator, it's very helpful to be able to suspend judgment for a time long enough to assess the other person's perspective and truly understand it. Because until you do that, you're not going to be as effective a negotiator as you could be. So here, instead of asking who's at fault, ask what is each person's contribution to the story. So we're shifting from blame to sort of mutual joint problem solving. And we're also shifting from assessing blame to uncovering the true narrative. Think of the old adage, there's his side, her side, and the truth. And this is an attempt to really find the truth. A little word about separating intention from impact. Often, when we look at the what happened conversation, there's a significant difference between what was intended by an action of either party and then how it was perceived, how it landed, its impact to the other party. And this distinction is crucial for moving away from blame and towards understanding. So in our first conversation, the focus is on shifting from a stance of assigning blame to either party to uncovering the true narrative of the dispute. And this approach stems from the understanding that each party is in a conflict that has their own perspective shaped by their own individual experiences and truth. So the goal here is not to decide who is right and who is wrong, but to explore these differing views to uncover a more complete picture of what happened. And so that's why we call it the what happened conversation. Here on the next slide, we have the feelings conversation. So that's our second out of 3. So the second one is the feelings conversation. Why do feelings matter? Well, unspoken emotions really shape legal conflicts. They do. They shape all of our interactions, our negotiations, the mediation, the very filing of a lawsuit is all about feelings. Why is this challenging to attorneys? Well, because many attorneys avoid emotions to stay rational. And unfortunately, clients often bring strong emotions into legal matters. But is it unfortunate? They can be really useful in terms of how we handle them. So the strategy here in the feelings conversation is actually to acknowledge the emotions and to do it in a way that doesn't lose credibility. And we also, in the feelings conversation, focus on using active listening and reframing emotional responses. So in a scenario, let's say a business dispute between partners, maybe there's an attorney that's representing a minority partner in a high-stakes business dispute. The client is visibly frustrated in a strategy meeting, and then they might say something like, "This is outrageous. I built this company with them, and now they're trying to force me out. I feel completely betrayed. I don't think you're pushing back hard enough. Why aren't we being more aggressive?" And the attorney can acknowledge the emotions without losing credibility by saying something like, "I completely understand why you feel this way. You've invested years into this company, and now you're in a position where your role and your future are feeling threatened or uncertain. That's incredibly frustrating and understandably feels like betrayal." And then I'm going to reframe that if I'm in that scenario, and I'm going to say something like, "It sounds that you want to make sure that you're protecting what you've built and that we're using every available strategy to secure your position. Let's walk through the options that give you the strongest leverage, both legally and strategically." So if I were an attorney, that's what it might sound like. And feelings are not threats if you know how to handle them. They can actually be huge helpers in moving the negotiation or mediation along. When handled properly, the attorney validates the client's emotions without reinforcing the reactive stance. And by reframing frustration into a strategy-focused conversation, the attorney redirects the energy towards action, towards actionable steps. And this allows the client to remain engaged in the process rather than either the reactivity or feeling dismissed or unheard. Moving on to the identity conversation, which is our third and final conversation in this model, is the identity conversation. Identity threats can derail settlements. Instead of letting it derail the settlement, the goal here is to offer strategies to balance zealous advocacy with identity needs. So if I'm an attorney, that's my goal. Conflict impacts self-perception in both the parties and in attorneys representing them. We need to recognize that if we're going to have an advantage in the negotiation. We need to look at that piece. In attorneys, identity triggers typically include competence, fairness, and professionalism. Those are their main triggers around their identity. And so when we're considering the identity conversation as it pertains to us as an attorney, and I'm not an attorney, I'm being completely fictitious now, just imagining it. And I want you to imagine it along with me. If you are an attorney, think to yourself, what does this case say about me as a lawyer? What does this case say about me as a litigation attorney? What does this case say about me as a trial attorney? That's kind of the food for thought, the consideration there. The strategy here is to reframe the self-perception so that you can stay effective under pressure, and to recognize when ego and reputation are affecting decision-making. Now, if you can be honest with yourself about that, then it will help you that much more when we apply all of this to each party. So it's sort of like when we're honest with ourselves, we can be honest with others. Litigation can pose a profound threat to an individual's self-concept and core beliefs. That's the truth, particularly in a business context where professional identities are very closely tied to competence and personal success. So when parties feel that their identity is under attack, they're likely to react defensively, which can derail negotiations. Imagine for a moment two co-founders of a high-tech startup, for example, one with a background in engineering, but the other with a background in business development. They're sort of at opposite ends of the spectrum. We see this quite frequently in the tech world, by the way. They find themselves in a heated dispute over the future direction of the company. The engineer wanted to prioritize production, wanted to prioritize product perfection and innovation, believing it was essential to the company's identity and long-term success. Then over here, we have the other partner, the one with the business development background, and they want to push for rapid market expansion, and they want to push for increased sales, and they want to focus on immediate revenue growth. And this seems like yin and yang at first. When they first get together, they're only seeing that the other has a strength where they don't, or seeing it complementary. But over time, these kind of partnerships can really devolve into too many differences. So it's really in how they handle it. If you were in this scenario as a litigator or an attorney, you'd need to recognize the identity threat. Be aware of how the conflict might threaten the self-image of the parties, because the awareness can guide more sensitive handling of the issues, while advocating zealously for a client's legal position and also working to safeguard their identity needs. So it's a balance of both, and the balance can prevent entrenchment. And entrenchment is what stalls mediations. So how is this useful? Well, this 3-conversation method supports attorneys to go beyond the surface issues and prepare for the real conversations that are actually happening in the room. The real egos, the real identity crisis, the real feelings. They're there already. So let's acknowledge them. Let's actually prepare for them, and let's be strategic, knowing that they're coming, and have planned responses to how we're going to handle them so the negotiation is to our own advantages. Again, if I were an attorney. As a mediator, I can't have any undue influence or any influence at all, really, in the parties. I'm sworn to neutrality. But when I see attorneys use these methods, they're so much more effective. In high-stakes mediation, where reputations, career, and millions of dollars may be on the line, this chart and that we're going to look at in a minute, the model of case prepping using the 3 conversations, just equips attorneys to win not just the legal battle, but the negotiation itself. The benefits are fantastic. You know, when we adopt this 3-conversation model and we prepare using it, we get better results for clients. We get reduced time spent on mediation. Who would like to spend less time in mediation? Raise your hand. I get paid by the case, not by the hour, so I would like to as well. And most importantly for attorneys, it allows them to maintain control of the case narrative. Who would like more control of the case narrative in their cases when they're handling settlements? I think any attorney would take that in a heartbeat. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's use this fictitious case study I've made up for you. It resembles, hopefully, nothing to anybody live or dead or real partnerships, but this is a completely fictitious case. It's called the Pacific Legal Partners, or PLP case. I've made it up. It's complete fantasy, but it's entrenched with very real business issues that we see in mediation all the time for business disputes. So let's break it down. Let's look at this conflict. It's the story of 2 partners who initially got together and had a fantastic yin and yang symbiotic relationship, but their differences became too big and it ruined their partnership. There are a few key moments here that I want to mention. From the strategic disagreements view, James favors aggressive litigation and Michael prefers risk management and structured deals. Clashing priorities between these two partners, James and Michael, led to internal friction and misaligned client strategies. They had some financial trust issues. There were accusations of a lack of transparency in firm finances, and James felt Michael was overly controlling. Michael believed James was reckless with firm resources. They had very different financial trust issues going on, but at the end of it, they both felt betrayed and trust was eroding. There was an escalation and personal grievances. There were minor disagreements that evolved into a power struggle over firm leadership, the leadership of the firm, so to speak. And then both began questioning each other's integrity and long-term commitment to the firm. So that led to a breakdown in communication. And the strategic discussions that were happening turned into personal attacks. Neither party felt heard, and this led to defensive posturing by both of them and ultimately stalled negotiations. So there were reputational and business risks. The clients and the employees were caught in the conflict. It created instability within the firm. And there was potential public fallout, which threatened both the attorneys' professional reputations. And so this is the nature of the case study business dispute that we're going to use to fill out our case prep. And I'm going to introduce this chart next that's going to help us do that. All right, so now let's build our case prep by completing this nifty chart I've made based on the 3 conversations model. So over here on the left, on the vertical column, we have all the different components of the 3 conversations model. On this axis, we have what is the story as they see it, what is their perspective or version of the other person's story, how did each of them contribute to the conflict, we have what was the impact and intent of that, and then we have what were the feelings and the identities involved. And then here at the bottom, we have something called a third story or a third perspective. And we're going to talk more about that later. Over here across the top on the horizontal axis, we have James Rivera, who's our imaginary partner, the charismatic, high-profile, aggressive trial attorney. And we have Michael Chan, who is our fictional other partner, the meticulous and risk-averse partner who specializes in corporate contracts and mergers. What we want to do here is fill in the chart with what we know, we've made the considerations of the 3 conversations, and now we write it down in black and white. So most attorneys focus on legal positions and financial terms in mediation. That's their job. But when we get into mediation, what we find, what's revealed, is that real conflicts are about how people feel and how they see themselves. And whether we like it or not, we can do a ton of legal work. We can analyze the numbers forever. We can analyze the legal arguments and cite precedent. But when we get in that mediation, we really have to acknowledge that how people feel and how they see themselves is going to shape how they respond to what you offer and how they offer you something in return or even in an opening offer. And so it doesn't matter how sensible your legal argument, how incredible your preparation on that to that end, or even how reasonable your offer is, or how much you can back it up. Real conflicts are about how people feel and how they see themselves, and that's going to shape how they respond, logical or not, reasonable or not. Some of the most successful Harvard Law School litigation attorneys I know use this approach and have built fantastic careers with this framework. I've seen it frequently used in the Northeast, New York, Chicago, etc., but I use it out here in California for my mediations, and you can see on my website the reviews that I get are just so lovely. For those attorneys who are considering using this, let me tell you that the attorneys I know who have used it say that it has allowed them to attract a very high level of clientele that are more accustomed to full service interactions. And so full service interactions are ones that acknowledge both the financial and the emotional needs of any client. Think about your own experience with full service in any level, and those sort of full service experiences that you're paying for are worth it because they're acknowledging usually more than one need, or I might even rephrase that to say they acknowledge needs on more than one level, whether it's a 5-star hotel or super first-class airlines. They're acknowledging multiple needs. And so you could think of it like that as it applies to your law practice. Just an elevated experience for the client. Okay, so let's move to the next slide where we have our completed chart. And so this is what the 3 conversations model looks like when we transform it into a case prep chart, the gold standard. So we're looking at up here in the upper left-hand corner, we have filling out the section called how they perceive their own story, right? And so here, James, who's the more charismatic, more aggressive trial attorney, James believes he built the firm's reputation by taking bold risks and scoring high-stakes litigation. He sees himself as the firm's driving force, responsible for its success. He feels betrayed that Michael's trying to control or restrain and undermine him by questioning his financial decisions and blocking high-profile cases. But then when we look at Michael's version of his own story, Michael believes he's protected the firm's stability and ethical standing from reckless decisions. He sees himself as the firm's guardian, ensuring long-term stability. He feels betrayed that James is putting the firm's legacy at risk, and he feels disregarded because James is disregarding the ethical concerns in the pursuit of fame and fortune as he sees it. But let's examine more closely how James sees Michael. James sees Michael as timid and controlling and risk-averse, unwilling to evolve with the modern legal industry. James believes Michael doesn't appreciate what it takes to win big and keep the firm competitive, whereas Michael sees James as ego-driven and reckless, prioritizing personal ambition over the firm's ethical and financial security. He believes James is blinded by his own hunger for prestige and basically will destroy the firm if left unchecked. So these are very different perspectives. But what are the contributions to the conflict? Because each party did contribute to the conflict here. For example, James' contributions here at the top left-hand corner of the chart. James took on high-risk clients without consulting Michael, creating a huge conflict of interest. He made financial decisions unilaterally, he spent heavily on client entertainment and expansion, and he held secret meetings about splitting the firm, which escalated the distrust. And Michael contributed to the conflict too. He blocked expansion efforts without proposing any alternatives. He secretly hired a forensic accountant to audit James, which of course made James feel like a criminal. And Michael implemented strict financial oversight that stripped James of any decision-making power, even though he's a partner. So each in their own way, they have contributed to the conflict. And this is the third story. This is what the different perspective that we're introducing here in a more balanced discussion in the negotiation. So let's look at how we filled out the impact and the intention section of the chart. So in James' column, he's the more aggressive trial attorney. His impact was that the impact of his contribution to the dispute was that the firm collapsed into dysfunction. Employees are demoralized in this scenario, productivity plummets, major clients pull away, and the firm's reputation is now at risk, especially in legal circles. And James, it sort of leaves him feeling powerless and undermined. And so his ability to lead, he always saw himself as a very strong leader. That's the identity piece. He feels basically like his leadership is now in question. His intent was to elevate the firm's status with high-profile litigation. He wanted more autonomy to make big decisions, and he felt entitled to that power as a partner. He didn't set out to betray Michael. He simply felt that he had to act alone since Michael didn't get it. So his intentions, while might have been well-meaning for the firm's health, or at least its prosperity, are vastly different than the impact. And we really see that in the chart here. And we can acknowledge that in the discussions. In fact, we likely need to before we get to a number. Whereas Michael's intent and impact were very different. Michael's intent was to protect the firm from reckless decision-making and ensure integrity. He wanted more transparency, he wanted more oversight, and not necessarily full control. He didn't set out to sabotage James. He felt like he had to take a defensive action before the firm unraveled. And so the impact of what he did was that the firm's credibility now is publicly scrutinized, which is, of course, affecting client trust and financial stability. And now Michael's own reputation as a leader is under fire, especially with the media covering this dispute in this fictitious case. So Michael feels betrayed and exhausted, believing James has put him in an impossible situation. Again, the intent was to protect the firm, but how he did it had a lot of negative impacts. So each party has contributed to this dispute, and these matters need to be addressed before anybody's really going to accept a number. I mean, you can spend the day pushing numbers back and forth, but wouldn't it be much more productive to address these very obvious human dynamics so that the defenses are lowered and the receptivity to your number is increased? And then here at the bottom of the chart, we see the feelings piece. James feeling frustrated, disrespected, and betrayed. Michael feeling angry, exhausted, and deeply disappointed. These feelings are really going to shape negotiations. How does this threaten the identity? Well, James sees himself as this charismatic visionary who wins big and plays big, and this dispute has really shook that to its core. Michael sees himself as a guardian of the legacy, the moral center, a trusted legal professional, and he's going to fiercely defend that in the negotiation. How is this going to play out? How are you going to get people to accept a number if you don't address these things? It's going to take a lot longer, it's going to be a lot more expensive, and it's going to be more difficult. How are you going to make a settlement with James if he considers himself as someone who should not have to answer to a partner like Michael who lacks his level of ambition? This is going to create a really big impasse in negotiation. So let's utilize what we've analyzed and put it into play so that we can have these conversations in ways that acknowledge feelings and emotions and the threats to identity, but retain credibility. To do that, we need to introduce the third story, which brings us to our next slide. The breakdown of Pacific Legal Partners, this fictitious PLP firm, wasn't just about financial mismanagement or strategic disagreements. The breakdown of this dispute was about power, ego, identity, and the erosion of trust. And regardless of the case study example, we see the same breakdowns rooted in the same unrecognized components of power, ego, and identity and erosion of trust in many, many different business and commercial disputes. So here, James Rivera and Michael Chan, the fictitious partners, were once inseparable business partners. They had built their law firm from the ground up. So they weren't just co-founders, but they were like brothers. And we often see this in partner disputes. And maybe James had been the firm's face and the rainmaker, but Michael had been the backbone. A series of betrayals occurred. So here, what we realize when we put it all in the chart is that this chart allows attorneys to go beyond the surface issues and prepare for the real conversations and the real drivers behind them happening in the room. In high-stakes mediation, where reputations, careers, and millions of dollars may be on the line, this chart equips attorneys to win not just the legal battle, but the negotiation itself. Using the 3 conversations model and putting it into a chart format for case prep helps attorneys quickly reframe the narrative in mediation much more easily. The third perspective in the chart offers a neutral way to reframe the conflict, moving it from an adversarial battle into a solvable problem. It's putting both parties on one side of the table and the problem on the other side of the table. Instead of pushing their clients' perspectives as right or wrong, then attorneys can now use the third perspective to shift the conversation towards a shared goal, a shared understanding, which we will eventually make into a resolution. Instead of saying something like James wants risky litigation and Michael is blocking it in the argument, attorneys can reframe that by saying James wants growth and Michael wants stability. What if we create a policy for the firm that outlines acceptable risk thresholds for new cases? What if we bring in a committee of a couple of the associates or partners that can weigh in on what new cases we accept? Or maybe the committee is just, of course, senior partners, but it's expanding the options and acknowledging the things that are getting in the way of the partnership. Instead of James saying, okay, James gets full control over the case selection, maybe propose we create a case selection committee to balance the risk and stability. So addressing the identity and the emotional concerns before negotiating the number. You'll spend a lot less time negotiating the number that way. If James insists on autonomy, for example, you can shift the discussion to, can we create guidelines that allow autonomy while ensuring transparency? Since transparency was one of the main disruptors. And if Michael resists any risk, then you might shift the discussion to how can we take calculated risk, but that also align with the ethical standards that I think are going to make our practice safe from harm. We can also use the impact and intent section of the chart to address emotional concerns. A lot of people don't necessarily realize that impact and intent is really about the emotional aspect, but sort of a different way of framing that is, Michael, when James pushed for high-stake cases, did you see it as reckless or as ambition? Let's just clarify where you're coming from. Or James, when Michael questioned finances, did you feel mistrusted? Let's talk about transparency needs here. Okay, so why is this style of case prep useful? Well, legal conflicts can often become emotionally charged with each party entrenching in their own narrative. And we don't want entrenchment in negotiation. That really stalls things. It costs court fees, it has all kinds of problems attached to it. We don't want entrenchment, we want movement. And this chart helps guide attorneys to separate perspectives, recognize contributions to the conflict, and see the broader picture rather than focusing solely on blame. It provides a structured way to map out how a conflict escalated and where the dispute resolution opportunities lie. All before you even sit down at the table for the first time. You've got a strategic plan and you know how you're going to respond in a way that allows you to maintain control of the narrative and move things forward in the direction that you would like them to go. Another reason it's useful is because in legal disputes, parties often fixate on money, contracts, or actions. But the real barriers to settlement are often trust, identity, and emotions. So when we lay it out in a chart for case prep, it helps attorneys identify and consider the human elements of conflict that may not be explicitly stated by the clients, but they are driving resistance to the settlement. In our case study, for example, the issue is framed as financial mismanagement and expansion of the dispute, but the real conflict is James is feeling underappreciated and Michael is feeling betrayed, something numbers alone don't really resolve. The third perspective in the chart offers a neutral way to reframe the conflict. So it helps both the attorney and the mediator reframe the narrative when you're in the mediation or settlement talk. Transforming it from adversarial battle to solvable problem is the what you want to do, but this is the way to do it. So instead of pushing your client's perspective as right, while the opposing side pushes it back as wrong, and you don't really make very much forward progress, attorneys can use this third perspective to shift the conversation toward a more common goal where we can get some engagement and we can get some movement. So instead of James wants risky litigation and Michael is blocking it, you might say James wants growth, Michael wants stability. What if we create a policy for the firm that outlines acceptable risk thresholds for new cases? What would that look like? And again, we're shifting it from how would we do that? So we're talking about the what, and then we're getting them into the how. As an attorney, this means that you're controlling the narrative in your negotiation. And probably the most useful part of all of this entire case prep is that when you lay it out like this, using the 3 conversations method, it identifies common settlement barriers before mediation ever begins. The impact, the intent, and the identity sections alone reveal what might cause the parties to reject a deal, even if your deal is objectively fair, even if your number seems extremely reasonable. You're going to look at the impact, the intent, and the identity sections and try to have that both sides argument in your mind so you can be prepared for what's going to come up and you can already plan how you're going to respond to it. Attorneys who understand these emotional drivers can proactively address them before mediation stalls, better influencing and controlling where the negotiation goes and also at what speed. A really skilled attorney in this type of negotiation, mediation, or settlement talk, so if we use our case study, for example, a skilled attorney, when James feels disrespected, isn't going to dig in their heels and insist that their client or their perspective is right. Instead, an attorney might start the interaction by recognizing James's contributions before addressing the dicier financial issues or the touchier business dissolution terms. And it's just such a small thing. It's very nuanced. But then again, I think we can all agree the best attorneys, their smoothness lies in their small nuances. And here in our final slide, we see mediation isn't about proving a mediator's ideas are right. It's not about proving either side is right or wrong. It's about floating ideas that help parties find value in the negotiation so you can move forward to a resolution that works for both parties. You're really focused on increasing options and leverage and helping the parties reframe positions. When you use this method as an attorney, you offer a lot more influence and control over the negotiations and are able to tilt them in your favor more quickly, more affordably, and with greater client care and client handling. And here in our final slide, we see mediation isn't about proving a mediator's ideas are right. It's not about proving either side is right or wrong. It's about floating ideas that help parties find value in the negotiation so you can move forward to a resolution that works for both parties. You're really focused on increasing options and leverage and helping the parties reframe positions. When you use this method as an attorney, you offer a lot more influence and control over the negotiations and are able to tilt them in your favor more quickly, more affordably, and with greater client care and client handling. Again, my name is Melissa Kinzler. I'm a commercial mediator in Southern California, and I want to thank you for inviting me here today to talk about the gold standard of case prep and how to use the 3 conversations model for strategic mediation case prep that can deliver superior settlements. If you have any questions or I can help you in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out. My contact information is here on the screen. My email is hello@melissakinzler.com, and my website is just my name, melissakinzler.com. You can reach me by telephone at 858-500-6692 or connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you again to our host, the Will Work for Food New Possibilities Hour, for inviting me here today. And please remember to donate to your local food bank if you found something useful in this presentation.
We're out of time. So I want to thank you very much for this insightful and systematic view into how to prepare for and conduct mediations. It'll be very helpful for all of us. I hope that those who are in a position to contribute do in fact contribute to the Second Harvest Food Bank of Santa Cruz County, California. We have the link up in the comments. Thank you very much to our audience for attending. Melissa, thank you so much for this outstanding presentation. And with that, we are complete.
Thank you for having me.